The queen is dead.
Turns out TV's pretty cool. Whether it's a long-running sitcom like Peep Show or a high-tension drama like Breaking Bad, I just like TV shows. But there's one genre that takes over my waking life every 2 months, and that's dramedy. Dramedy is exactly what it sounds like. It's drama and comedy mixed together into this weird, depressing middle child. It's a genre that's very common nowadays because a lot of writers like to write funny stuff but also want to write emotional stories. They're also the only shows that win the comedy Emmys nowadays. Sorry, It's Always Sunny. Dramedy isn't necessarily a new genre. In fact, it's been a genre for years, especially in cinema. Wes Anderson makes dramedies, Noah Baumbach makes dramedies, but it wasn't as well known as it was in film. One show most people would consider to be the first dramedy was MASH, as it would have episodes that were mostly comedies but would get quite emotional every now and then. Same can be said about a lot of shows in the 2000s like Buffy or Scrubs. Although it wasn't until the 2010s where the quintessential dramedy started to rise. Some of the earliest examples include Girls, Master of None, Orange is the New Black, Insecure, so on and so forth. In this video, I want to look at the specific things that make a dramedy, like tropes, how they handle their episode plots, as well as the problems that modern audiences have with the genre. The dramedies I'll be focusing on today are Atlanta, Fleabag, and The Bear. This is controversial title name. Now, before I talk about the writing and the characters, I want to talk about the visuals. In my Space video, which you definitely watched, right? I talk about how the show decided to go for a single cam setup instead of a multi-cam setup, which was very common for sitcoms back in the day. I think it's very important to mention because it not only shows the shift in sitcoms, but the shift in TV as well. After the laugh track sitcom died a slow death, a lot of sitcoms decided to go for a single cam setup, especially past the 2010s. You know, shows like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Community, Young Sheldon. Most of those shows don't actually have a live audience, especially like Young Sheldon being a spin-off of a multicam sitcom show. TV just became more cinematic as the years go by, especially in dramas. In Hate Bomber Guy's video on VHS, which I've rewatched a little too much, he mentions how filmic awareness caused TV to go a more cinematic route, which definitely influenced the style that dramedies go for. Now let's talk about the visuals of our three shows. Even a show like Fleabag, which is the most simplistic visual-wise compared to the other two shows, but it still looks more cinematic than your average single-cam sitcom. Its style is very natural and it doesn't have much dramatic lighting or grandiose camera movements. It makes you feel like an observer in the room with them, especially with her breaking the fourth wall. Atlanta is quite similar but way different. Most of the episodes were directed by Hiro Murai, who has worked with Donald Glover since the 3005 music video. Its cinematography is also quite similar in that it stays quite natural, except it has more contrast, especially with the shadows. They even added this glowy film look to the show even though it's filmed on digital. And then we have The Bear, that probably has the best visuals out of the three. Christopher Storer is both the creator and director for the show, and he really does know how to portray this chaotic environment. From the quick cuts to the close-ups to the overlapping dialogue, the directing really makes you feel like you're in the kitchen with these guys screaming in your ears. This is also way more apparent with its use of one-ers. Episode 7 of The Bear features a one take that lasts 18 minutes, which I'll talk about later. The Bear also features scenes of hallucinations and dream sequences where they play with editing and have weird visualizations. The show opens with Kami on a street letting a bear out of a cage and trying to tame it. This scene could mean many things. Some say it's a representation of his emotions or even a restaurant. But overall, great visuals. The other two shows do have these moments as well. Fleabag has this scene on the train with all the passengers kind of moving in beat with the song Sail by AWOL Nation, signifying that she's on her period. And Atlanta, Atlanta has dream sequences, alright. The whole show is a dream sequence. In my space video, I had a whole section talking about the founding of the 20-somethings genre. I mentioned how it mostly focused on relating to the next generation of young adults, who were Gen X at the time. This also applies to dramedies, focusing on the generation after, which is millennials. In other words, a dramedy is a 20-something sitcom, but with a depressed millennial twist. Most dramedy protagonists are young adults in their late 20s to early 30s trying to navigate adulthood, whether it's through a struggling career or them trying to rebuild broken relationships. But they also might have a dark past or an event that might have led them to their current situation. In The Bear, we're introduced to Kami as a hard-working and resourceful individual. This is from his background working in some of the best restaurants in the world. This is from his background working in some of the best restaurants in the world. In the first few minutes, he does a bunch of transactions, deliveries and whatnot just for a day's worth of food. The crucial event, however, is Kami's brother, Mike, offing himself, which is why he now owns the restaurant. He comes into conflict with chef staff like Richie, who was a close friend of his brother's.
This is your brother's house, okay? Yeah, remember? I was running it fine without you.
Why didn't he leave it to you then?
All this while trying to navigate his job and make the restaurant a non-toxic environment. This can also be applied to Atlanta, but not in the same way. In the first episode, Ern isn't happy with his current life. He's at a job he hates, he has to sleep at the mother of his child's house while still having feelings for her, and his parents only think he wants to talk to them for money. He's also someone who's supposed to be at Princeton, but it's heavily implied that he was kicked out. But after realizing his cousin Alfred, aka Paperboy, might be a successful rapper, he takes an opportunity to get in contact and ask him to be his manager.
So, Zoo Tycoon. You want in on Paperboy? What?
But I think Fleabag is the most direct example of this. Fleabag is trying to navigate her messy love life, all while struggling to keep a business afloat after her friend / business partner offs herself. On top of that, a whole bunch of family issues. The pilot does a very good job at getting you to like the main character whilst also showing her massive flaws. This is due to the fourth wall break she does in the show. With both Fleabag and The Bear, the mains are still trying to cling to the past where the person is still alive while still being haunted by aspects of it. Although the same could be said with Atlanta, with Alfred's mum having recently died.
I ain't seen or heard from you since my mom's funeral, and the first thing I hear out your mouth is let's get rich.
This is where most of the drama comes from. Characters like Richie or Natalie serve the same purpose as characters like Alfred or Claire. That leads me to talk about the rest of the cast members. One of the main differences a dramedy has to sitcoms is how it adheres to tropes. From Friends to Community, all the characters are sitcom archetypes. Every sitcom character has to be written as a monolith so they can be distinguishable but also have market appeal in a way. The dramedies don't necessarily care as much. With Fleabag, most of the characters are pre-existing with them being in the original play. With the other cast members in these shows, they're either family, past lovers, or just new characters. This is most apparent with Fleabag. We got Fleabag, Claire, Boo, the dad, the godmother, the bank manager, and Harry. Not to mention characters like Bus Rodent and Arsehole Guy. Her relationship with her sister is what you'd expect from a sibling relationship. They have a strong bond, but they either bicker or be very weird when expressing emotions.
Oh! God. What was that? Jesus! Fucking hug! Why the fuck did you do that?
There's also some conflict with Claire's husband, who's also a terrible and annoying person. Harry is Fleabag's boyfriend, who she breaks up with on a regular basis. The first episode even introduces him with one of these breakups. It's probably one of my favourite scenes of the show.
Well, turn up my house drunk in your underwear, it won't work this time.
It will.
Her relationship with her dad is complicated. He's still grieving from their mother's death and tries to bond with his daughters by giving them trips to feminist lectures or women's retreats. There's also some conflict with the fact that not too long after, he starts dating their mom's student, who's now their stepmother. They both hate each other quite equally, with the godmother being way more subtle. At the end of the episode, Fleabag decides to steal a statue from her, which becomes a big piece of iconography for the show. Atlanta the Bear have a cast that's actually quite similar to your traditional sitcom. Hell, there's even a theory that the Atlanta cast is a reincarnated version of the Seinfeld cast. You got the performer that's starting to rise in fame, the friend who helps him out whilst complaining about how unsuccessful his life is, the girl who was in some kind of past relationship with one of the characters, and the wacky unemployed friend. The cast of characters all represent different aspects of Atlanta. Alfred represents fame in Atlanta and how it's not as it seems. Van represents the average person in Atlanta who has to go through financial troubles, childcare and employment. And Darius just represents the social and surreal side of Atlanta and is enthralled by that. And then you have characters like Ern. Ern is the average person who's interested in the fame side. This is seen as a driving force for him to become his cousin's manager. And then there's a cast of the Bear. We have Carmi, Sydney, Richie, Marcus, Tina, Ibra, Gary, Back, and Natalie. The Bear has the largest cast out of the three. The show starts with the characters kinda taking sides. Sydney, who is a newcomer in the beef, admires Carmi's skill. Same goes for Marcus, who Carmi inspires to improve his baking in desserts. And then you have characters like Richie that prefer what the Bear was before Mike died, but starts to change and come to terms with it. Same goes for characters like Tina, who goes from clashing with Sydney to actually learning from her to get better herself, which is a main thing with this show. It's less of a 20-somethings comedy and more of a workplace comedy, like Cheers. There's a lot of differences when it comes to dramas and comedies. I remember when I was a kid, I used to confuse drama with melodrama and think I was going to end up crying by the end of it, which isn't necessarily true. Drama is characterized by the stakes and storylines, whereas comedy focuses on storylines that make you laugh. Both make you care about the characters in different ways, but with comedies it's more so like, oh, these characters are hilarious, but dramas just got to do with them succeeding at their goal. And sometimes that goal can be life-threatening at times. Think about shows like Breaking Bad. In TV, most dramas are serialized, which means they have every episode connected one after the other because of their overarching storyline. Whereas sitcoms are episodic, meaning every episode handles a different plot. The term sitcom is in fact short for situational comedy. Dramedies usually do the latter, focusing on the problem of the day format from sitcoms, but what makes dramedies a little different are the consequences, which is what they take from drama to give it a more serialized feel. For example, in Atlanta, the first episode ends with one of the main characters going to jail, and so the next episode will be about that. Certain aspects are treated with more severity than they would be in a sitcom. Let's look at how our shows handle their comedy and drama with their episode plots. Fleabag's funniest moments come from her either saying how she truly feels to the audience or people around her. There are even a lot of scenes that show Fleabag not necessarily adhering to things relating to feminism, especially with the events her dad sets up for her and her sister. But a lot of the drama comes from not only the dark reality of the event that happened with Boo, but also from how she feels about her own actions. Not only that, but the people around her start to not take her self-destructive behaviours anymore. There's one episode where she talks about the weird tactics she does when breaking up or getting back together with Harry.
I don't think this is working.
That episode ends quite hilariously, but ends with a somewhat sad ending for Fleabag, as she realises she can't keep acting this way. Now, what about Atlanta? Well, what's unique about Atlanta is its world building, which is a weird term to use when talking about a dramedy, but when Donald Glover was asked to describe his show Atlanta, he called it Twin Peaks with rappers. I don't see it, but at the same time I do. Okay, I'll stop. Just watch the space video, okay? Its surreal storytelling is one of the trademark aspects of the show, like meeting up with Migos, or doing an interview for a fictional version of BET, or taking part in a charity basketball match with Justin Bieber, who's also black in this show. It definitely comes from Donald Glover's experience as a rapper and just coming from Atlanta, Georgia. It even takes events from the news and social media, both serious and unserious. The comedy comes from the characters having to constantly go through odd or awkward situations to get something, which is very similar to a sitcom episode. But like I said before, there are real consequences if they don't succeed.
Okay, see, I'm poor, Darius, okay? And poor people don't have time for investments because poor people are too busy trying not to be poor.
When I mentioned that the characters represent different aspects of Atlanta, this is what the episodes usually are about. Alfred has to deal with the frustrating scenarios that any celebrity would have to go through, except times that by 11. Like, he really suffered more than Jesus.
I mean, you'll be alright though. You know what I'm saying? The song hot, bro. It'll probably go platinum or some shit.
I ain't making no money off the fucking song, man.
And storylines always involve him trying to get Alfred gigs and get paid, both from the gigs and just overall. But those scenarios don't always go to plan. Same with Van, whose episodes involve her trying to get by financially or having to be in very awkward social situations most of the time. Some episodes even feature Ern, like the Juneteenth episode. And Darius, he doesn't necessarily have that many singular episodes, but when he does, he nearly dies. Atlanta does a good job at not only satirizing what it means to be a rapper in Atlanta, but also just black in America. And then we have The Bear. When it comes to the episode plot section of The Bear, I felt like it needs to have its own segment because it brings out a problem that a lot of dramedies face, which is, aren't they just dramas? For this bit, I wanted to dress like Richie from season 2, but yeah, this shirt is quite oversized, but overall, still cool. With The Bear, there's been a huge debate on whether it's more of a drama than it is a comedy. This has especially been an issue with it sweeping the Emmys. In fact, networks are trying to move The Bear into the drama category. Like, that's how much people care about this. A lot of people, including the writers, say it's a comedy because it's 30 minutes long. But I don't think that's necessarily true. Like, I still think it's pretty funny. In my opinion, it all has to do with where the comedy comes from. Like I said before, most comedy and sitcoms comes from the situations as well as the character. In The Bear, the episode plots aren't inherently comedic. Trying out a new chef system, catering a kid's birthday party, handling a bad health inspection review. The situations aren't comedic, but the way the characters handle them are. And I think season 1 does this more than season 2, in my opinion. There's just a lot more comedic circumstances when it comes to the restaurant run with no money and a dysfunctional staff. It's a trademark workplace comedy in that sense, which was technically the season that won the awards last Emmy season. In season 2, they have an overarching goal of renovating their restaurant, which is a lot more of a serialized drama plot than it is a comedy plot. A lot of comedy shows would keep the shop how it was instead of trying to change it, as that's where the hilarity comes from. That's like Cheers renovating their bar into Weatherspoons. I don't know what the equivalent to Weathers is in the US. Please let me know in the comments. Although it isn't too much for a comedy to have an overarching plot. Seinfeld had a whole season dedicated to them making the pilot of the show. But let's focus on where the comedy comes from in The Bear. On an article by Catherine Porter for Paste magazine, she says, "The comedy is in the chaos of the disaster the characters face." Oh my god. The comedy is in the chaos of the disaster the characters face. And while that's not what a traditional comedy is known for, it doesn't mean that it isn't a comedy. Episodes like Review and Fishes are very chaotic but hilarious at the same time. There's some comedy in the way Mike mocks Uncle Lee, but there's some sadness in the way Lee calls him useless, knowing how he ends up. All this matched up with the 20 other things that happened in the episode, so I'm not going to spoil it too much because it's really good. Same goes for everyone's outbursts in Review, as they quickly go insane, smashing donuts, stabbing each other by accident. Although I do understand how audiences may feel. These scenes cause more anger and stress in the viewer than they do laughter. But honestly, those emotions are quite close to laughter.
I'm sorry. I giggle when I get nervous.
I can quote a billion lines from episode 7 just because of how hilarious it is. I don't know, I may need help. Nearly every episode is filled with a comically chaotic environment where everything goes wrong. But there's a large focus on the serious aspects, sometimes even more than the comedic. It handles subjects of grief, depression and generational trauma that is very heavy-handed for a comedy, but nonetheless handles these themes very well, which is one of the biggest strengths of The Bear. While the show is intense and depressing most of the time, there are a lot of great character moments where they learn to bear themselves and work together to make the restaurant a better place. And if there's anything that this show has that's common to your traditional comedy show, it's hearth. Or hearth.
I got hearth.
You're gonna need
funny. This is a dilemma a lot of dramedies face. Some shows just struggle to balance two genres. Some shows are more comedies than they are dramas, and some shows are more dramas than they are comedies. With The Bear, the writers probably focused more on having great character development and good writing with high stakes than writing an absolutely hilarious show. In conclusion, fine, let's talk about Barry. But before I talk about the show, let's talk about Bill Hader himself. Bill Hader is apparently a big film nerd. He originally wanted to become a filmmaker and worked as a production assistant for years. But he didn't have his breakthrough until he joined SNL, where he thrived with his character acting and impressions. He even became a creative consultant on South Park, and eventually starred in a bunch of comedies in the late 2000s, especially during the Judd Apatow comedy era. After being in the industry for decades, he was finally able to create his own TV series. And honestly, probably the best dramedy. It was created by Bill Hader and Alec Berg, as well as being directed mostly by Bill himself. The plot in of itself sounds quite comedic. Barry is about Barry, a hitman who, whilst on a mission, decides he wants to join an acting class and become an actor.
You know how you and I talk all the time about my purpose?
You think acting could be your purpose?
First, let's talk about the characters. The characters consist of Barry, Mr. Cusino, Fuchs, Sally, the acting class, and NoHo Hank. Barry does slightly fit the criteria of dramedy protagonists, as he's trying to run away from his past. But instead of trying to mend old relationships, he just wants to leave those as soon as possible. Especially with Fuchs. The episode plots are quite serialized, with the episodes before being important to watching the next one. The drama also comes from him trying to run from his job, as well as his own internal issues like his PTSD and his anger, and he gets angry a lot. The comedy usually comes from the character's stupidity or cluelessness or irrationality, whether it's from the characters from the acting class or the Chechen mob. There's always a trait that's gonna make them hilarious. The show is very Coen Brothers-esque when it comes to its character writing. Their films usually involve characters trying to cheat their way through situations, but karma gets the best of them. So I wouldn't be surprised if Bill got some influence from them, because he does like their films. I repeat, he does like their films. I'm not reaching this time. And the last thing I want to talk about are the visuals. Bill Hader's style of directing allows for the show to be able to balance not only comedy and drama, but action, thriller, and even horror at times. Especially with episodes like Ronnie/Lily or 710N. If you want to know how to film and frame physical comedy, you should definitely watch this show. Like, it's generally really good at these things. The show also has probably some of the best hallucination and dream sequences I've seen, not only on television but in media. I don't know why this has become a criteria in this video. I don't know why. His experience in comedy and love for film really made for one of the best TV shows on television. Bear in mind, this was the show that everyone was like, oh no, it's not a comedy, it's too depressing. Like, with The Bear, I get it. But with this... Rami is a show created by comedian Rami Youssef. He plays Rami Hussein, a first-generation Muslim living in New Jersey, and it follows his struggles with being a good Muslim in America, whether it has to do with his love life or with his struggle to keep in touch with his Egyptian side. It's definitely one of the most honest shows I've seen on television, and I'd highly recommend you all give it a watch. Insecure was a show created by Issa Rae. It follows Issa and her friend Molly as they navigate their careers and relationships as black women in the contemporary world. Now, while I haven't watched most of the show, it's definitely important to include it as being a big part of the dramedy genre in the mid-2010s, especially as it was originally a web series called Awkward Black Girl. So yeah, give Insecure a watch. The White Lotus was created by Mike White. It's an anthology show that follows rich tourists going on vacation to a resort called the White Lotus. It's also a new part of the miniseries that was too successful, so they turned it into an anthology show. Honestly, out of those shows, it fits this show the best. Each season is set in a different country, which allows for great commentary on the country, tourism, colonialism, as well as stuff dealing with familial problems and relationship dynamics. Also, one of them gets murdered each season. Dreaming Whilst Black is a show created by Ali Hughes and Adyani Salmon. It follows Kwabena, a young black filmmaker trying to get his short film made, but has to deal with the struggles of being a black filmmaker in England and what it really takes to make it. Quickly became one of my favourite shows of 2024, mainly because I watched it 3 to 4 times. No, 6 30-minute episodes, okay? Shut up! But yeah, I'd highly recommend you all binge this show, because if this doesn't get a second season, then we have failed as a society. This is I don't know why this is a thing now. Comedy's in a weird place at the moment. Whether it's old comedians blaming cancel culture or just a lack of comedic media overall. I've seen 2 or 3 videos about how there's not many pure comedies anymore, especially from like big directors that were very big in the 2000s. Adam McKay doesn't make Step Brothers anymore. He makes a tone-deaf, political dramedy. That's coming from someone that likes Vice. This is no different from how people feel about sitcoms, especially with the rise of dramedies. I do think the way most people see this genre is a little bit reductive. You know, they see it as the sometimes sad, sometimes funny genre, you know? But I do understand why people aren't really into it. Because a lot of people want pure comedic media. People want white bread but have to deal with 50-50 because of woke. But you know, I don't mind 50-50. I think the genre is a great mix for telling stories with emotional depth whilst also being super hilarious. Dramedies have been a great representation of maturity and adulthood, especially with the quarter-life crisis being a main thing with these shows. It's also been a great way of telling stories about marginalized groups, showing not only the struggles they face, but the joy and hilarity of being who they are. This is further shown with shows like Fleabag and Atlanta. Even shows like Barry and The Bear have great critiques of masculinity, even though they're quite subtle.
That's toxic masculinity.
The fuck is that?
The criteria I mentioned in this video are honestly quite useless, which is why I talked about Barry. Because Bill isn't a millennial. He's Gen X. Big mistake I made when writing this video was comparing these shows to sitcoms. Because at the end of the day, it's its own genre. No matter how dark the themes of these shows are, they're still comedies. Even if it's just 50-50. But with the current Emmy situation, you can understand why people care so much. All the main shows I've talked about have won multiple Emmys, and deserve them 100%. So it does make you wonder if this is the standard for not only comedy television, but comedy media overall. But I don't necessarily think it's for the worst. In conclusion, do I think dramedies are replacing the sitcom? No. Because Abba Elementary exists. Go watch it.
Sweet baby Jesus and the grown one too.